This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome back to the Rebel Author Podcast, episode 42. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Alex Bryant all about psychology and character psychology. It is a deeply fascinating conversation, even if I do say so myself. I definitely geeked out whilst we were talking, because we delve into the topics of madness and sanity and where that line is really drawn. And I hope will be useful for you for your character creation. But first to last week's question. And I am getting increasingly shit at making sure these questions are posted at the right time. I don't know what is wrong with me, but I constantly forget. So only a few comments this week. Number one was from Bear Kloss, who said 3 words to describe her author strategy, her author branding. I should tell you the question first, shouldn't I? The question was, what 3 words describe your author branding? And Bears were quality, detailed, and entertaining, hopefully. Jackie then also came in and said 3 words for my author branding are new, lacking, and underdeveloped. And she then said, I'm working on it. So I challenged back because we are here to support you, where I'm here to support all indie authors. And I'm behind you. So I said, how about fresh, hopeful, and learning? So hopefully you will take a slightly different spin on that going forward. So this week's question is, what part of character creation do you find the hardest? The book recommendation of the week this week is The Occupation Thesaurus by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. I was honoured to get an advanced copy of this book and I loved it. They always seem to knock it out of the park, and I love their thesauri. And I even wrote a blog post about the reasons why I particularly loved this thesaurus and the revelations that I got whilst reading it, which have helped me writing and developing The Scent of Death, which is the next book I'll finish because I've started it already after I finish Train. And also, very excitingly, I am going to be interviewing Becca towards the end of July, which and obviously all about the Occupation Thesaurus. So look out for that shortly. And of course, I will leave links to the blog that I posted and also to purchase the book in the show notes. Personal update news this week. I was delighted to be interviewed by HB Lyne on her Self-Publishing Mastery YouTube channel. We had an amazing chat about adulting and parenting and creativity and routine and lots more things. So if you would like to watch or listen to that, then I will leave a link in the show notes. This past week, I have been working on Trey, and oh my fucking God, I literally cannot believe the difference a week can make. The week before last was the week that I cracked the plot problem, and I stripped out what ended up being about 12,000 words, I think, from the book, which at the time was pretty shocking to me. I didn't lose the words, I've shunted them forwards. It's basically a subplot that if I had more book space, I would definitely include in book 3, but I don't. So I've rewritten some of the book and put it into the next one. So at least I'll be starting not from 0 when it comes to book 4. But it is Friday the 24th of July as I record this, and I am halfway through the book. Like, I shit you not, I cannot believe in a week I've basically gone from 0 to 50%. So I think I started around the 18th, 19th, so less than a week, in fact, and it's the 24th today, and I'm now 50% of the way through. Now, obviously, I'm not drafting this from scratch. The book was 75k before I hacked out the 12,000 words. I'm now back up to, I think, 72,000 words, something like that. But what I've been doing is hacking the book to pieces. I mean, quite literally. I've got parts of chapters that were almost at the end of the book, nearer the beginning. I've got bits from the beginning that are in the middle, vice versa. I don't think a single chapter went unedited. And I've been inserting scenes, creating new content, and basically stitching the book together. And I have learned so much about my process through the drafting of this book, because I actually started it 2 years ago. And in fact, I've learned so much. I may have to write a blog, or I don't know, do a solo episode. I'm not sure yet, but I have certainly learned a lot of lessons about how I write, and that they may not necessarily be useful for anyone else, because I don't think I know two writers that write in the same way. But yeah, I feel like I am finally developing a process for how I write fiction, and I have been craving that for so long. And I think it is just a matter of time and the number of books. And so, yes, I am super excited. I now feel like I could probably get to the end of this draft, I don't know, maybe a week or two at the most. I think if I continue at the pace I've been going, I am in the middle where the biggest rewrites are at the moment. So like today, it took me like the whole day to get one chapter, and it's not even finished because it's in 6 pieces, but the right order with the right motivations for all the characters. But yes, and so that means that I'm hoping by the end of August I will be handing the book to my critique partner, and usually it's quite a quick process between getting her edits and comments back and handing it then to the editor, which means it's highly likely now that I will publish this book before the end of the year, which is amazing. I am super excited. Okay, in other news, I have also I am almost to the point where I will be recording the Anatomy of Prose course. I still want to launch the course at the end of September. Trying to pick up speed with that. I am almost through the slide decks, I think, although this week I spent a lot of the week doing bonus material and coming up with ideas for extra things that I can include. So that's quite exciting, and I'm starting to think about the marketing and the launch for that as well. And last but by no means least, we have an almost completed audio booth, which is so exciting. I just have to hang the door and then order all of the acoustic foam and panelling, which I will be doing at the end of this month. And then I think probably, well, depending on how busy I am in August, I mean, I've already got the 2 big projects, which are Finishing Tray and the prose course. I hope to have recorded at least 30 to 50% of the book by the end of the quarter, so by the end of September, with a view to having done the whole thing and having it go through ACX and Findaway before the end of the year. So yeah, I'm excited, and I'm excited to start recording at last too. Listener Rebel of the Week this week is HB Lyne. HB says, I was about 15 and went to a good school in a small tourist town. At lunchtime, a lot of us used to go to the castle ruins in the centre of town to eat our fish and chips. But one lunchtime I snuck off with 3 other girls, one of whom had brought an interesting cocktail in from home. We went to a quiet nook tucked away down the cliff from the castle and shared this drink. It was in a plastic bottle, and she was vague about what was in it. We returned to school very giggly, and I stumbled into my first class of the afternoon, PE. By the time I got to drama class at the end of the day, I felt very ill and spent the whole class hiding in a dark corner with my head in my hands. It was one of my fondest memories and cemented my nature as a rebel. I love this story. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely did my fair share of naughty things at school that I probably shouldn't have, including turning up to exams in a less than great state, and I'm going to pretend that my mum doesn't listen to this podcast. If you'd like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your story. It can be any kind of rebellion, big, small, or somewhere in between. You can email your Rebel story to rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com or tweet me at rebelauthorpod. Thank you to new patron Cari Buziak. I really, really do appreciate all of the support, and that includes all of my current patrons. I know I say this every week, but I say it because it's true. You guys help to both keep the podcast running and make me feel like what I'm doing is helping and worthwhile. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for all of your support. If you would like to support the show and get access to all of the bonus essays, posts, content, giveaways and opportunities, then you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sacha Black. And that's Sacha with a C and not an S. This week's episode is sponsored by Kobo, so I will play a word from the sponsor and then we'll get on with the show.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tara.
And we're from Kobo Writing Life. Kobo's free, fast, and easy self-publishing platform. KWL is built by authors for authors, and our team of dedicated book lovers is always working hard to help authors reach new readers around the world.
We wanted to tell you a little about Kobo's global reach. From our home base here in Toronto, we work hard to keep customers reading all over the world. And as a KWL author, you're doing your part too. Here are some tips that can help your books stand out globally.
At Kobo Writing Life, you can set the price in 16 currencies. When you're pricing your book, you should consider how your prices are being shown globally in our store. Is your $5.99 USD price showing as $4.69 in British pounds? Chances are an awkward price will likely just sway the purchase of your book. Make sure you are manually setting the price in all currencies.
Speaking of all the worldly currencies, you can also set price promotions with KWL that are currency specific. Want to honor Canada Day with a promotion? You can do that in Canadian dollars and leave your other prices just as they are.
And we haven't even mentioned all the partner stores Kobo has around the world. Did you know that you can target your marketing to our partners directly? If you want to learn more about this or any aspects of KWL, check out the Kobo Writing Life podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts, and find us on social.
You can create your free account today at kobo.com/writinglife. We hope to see your books on Kobo very soon. Happy writing!
Hello and welcome back to the Rebel Author podcast. Today I am joined by Dr. Alex Bryant. Alex is a psychology tutor and improv comedian, appearing twice a month in London's Museum of Comedy with his troupe Hive Mind, making up brand new fantasy worlds every night. He's been a drama teacher, playwright, and ski instructor too. At Cambridge, he researched delusions as they occur in both mental illness and in everyday life. It turns out it's much harder to tell the difference between madness and sanity than we might think. In a world where most people still believe in superstition, magic, and the paranormal. Alex is also fascinated by the psychological traits that lead to extremism and intolerance, forces which drive societies apart if left unchecked. These interests led to the world of God Machine, where both witchcraft and fear of witchcraft are still running rampant in the modern world, with both hilarious and tragic results. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I don't think I've ever heard such an eloquent one in my life.
Oh, stop. Well, yes, no, it's a pleasure to have you. And I know that we were supposed to meet in real life at London Book Fair, and bloody coronavirus strikes again and cancelled the London Book Fair. But yes, I'm super excited to talk to you today, not just because you have a gorgeous book, but also because you are a psychologist, and that is my background also. So I am super excited to get into a really niche topic that I think will help writers, and also just because it's fascinating to me, and so I get to nerd out. But first, tell everyone a little bit more about you, your writing journey, and how you got to where you are today.
Wonderful. So, as you mentioned, I did a PhD in delusions and how they appear across the human experience, from people we call mad to people that we would like to call sane. But before I was ever interested in that, I was interested in writing. I grew up obviously being a very keen reader, reading under the sheets. And that passion stayed with me until at the age of 19, I got the first idea for this world that I developed shortly after falling off a horse. Quite a traumatic experience for my developing mind. But then a whole world came out of it, and here I am. I spent all my time at Cambridge kind of developing this world and starting to write this novel. And then over the course of that, it turned into a series of 7 novels rather in the end. The number fluctuated as I went. And the novel I'm now writing is actually not the novel I started writing. It's the novel I started writing is now book 5 in the series, because I got a lot of backstory to get through before I can even get to the main novel I wanted to write originally. So I've currently just brought out book 1 in this series, and I'm right now working very hard on book 2.
I love how that happens. Also happened to me. I was originally writing a standalone. 5 books later, it's now a 5-book series with a prequel and a few short stories and bonus epilogues thrown in along the way. It's funny how that happens. And also, it wasn't even supposed to be written from the character's point of view that it's been written from. So yeah, those bastard characters. Okay, so you've recently published the book that we're talking about, and I absolutely adore the cover. I think it's gorgeous, also because of the colours, so on brand for me. So I love purple and the blues. And anyway, so tell everyone a little bit more about your book.
My book is called The Identity Thief, and as you've mentioned, it's the first book in the God Machine series. The God Machine series as a whole is set in a parallel version of modern-day London, where magic is real, but unfortunately it doesn't work. So it's not too far away from our real world, but there's a few key differences. Magic is also completely illegal, so the only people practicing it are sort of shady underground criminal characters committing sorcery, in the alleyways of London at night. And our main our heroine, who's a 12-year-old schoolgirl, obviously has nothing to do with that murky world, except that her mum, guess what, is heading up one of the major police forces that deals with sorcery and tries to tackle sorcerers. So needless to say, she soon finds herself coming into sharp contact with sorcerers herself and trying to keep her head above water when faced with threats that she's never seen before. The Identity Thief is all about one such sorcerer called Cuttlefish, whose modus operandi is changing his own appearance to resemble that of anyone he wants, loved ones, friends, and he uses that to cause chaos and dismay wherever he goes. He's on the hunt for a mysterious ancient series of magic books called the Daedalus set. These are sort of grimoires that are enchanted and that allegedly contain the secrets to building a magical artifact called the God Machine. And his quest to find these books and build the God Machine will bring him sooner or later straight into Cass's own school, where it'll just be her up against this formidable foe.
I love it. I love that you have your pitch nailed, because I can assure you that a lot of authors do not. I mostly do not have my book pitches down, apart from the one that I'm writing now. But yeah, I really struggle. So that was excellent. Okay, so I'm going to throw in a question that I didn't tell you I was going to ask, but how have you found writing the second book versus writing the first book? Like the experience and the process?
Oh boy, yeah, it's a very different process. The first book took me, by some counts, 10 years, by other counts, 13 years to write. So quite a long-winded process. As I said, I first had the idea when I was just 19 years old, falling off a horse. That's when I thought I should write this book. And as I mentioned, the book I'm now writing is not even that book. Even the book I was meant to write then is now totally different from the book I even want to write now. Everything has changed, including how the magic works, who the villain is, who the main characters in the main characters' lives are, and so on. Everything is completely different. And yes, as you can imagine, for a 10-year process, I wrote down a lot of dead ends. I went in a lot of irrelevant directions. I probably racked up, I've got no idea, 200 or 300 or maybe even 500,000 words of material in this process, which obviously most of which is not in the book. In comparison, yeah, I started writing book 2 in April. It's now July, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through my first draft. And it's been, I planned the book properly. I actually made a plan before I started, so I knew what I was going to do. That saved me a lot of time, I can assure you. And even though that's changing, I'm a much more on top of that. I'm a much better aware of how the plot needs to work, what key ingredients need to be in the plot to make it make sense, and what really fundamentally matters to my plot, which is characters and emotions and relationships, and what doesn't really matter, which are sort of chance events and special objects and all the rest of it. So yeah, the first book's been a learning book, and I've come a long way, and I'm still learning a lot now, but it's a lot more easy.
I love it. It sounds very familiar in terms of experience to what I also experienced with my first book, which had the idea when I was like a young teen, and then the book basically completely changed, even though it's the same book, but it's not, it's completely different. Yes, and I think my count, so I wrote 3 full drafts and threw away 2 of them completely and just started again. So I think I racked up 237,000 words for a 64,000 word book. So yeah, I feel your pain. Okay, so we are here to talk about psychology and characters because of your extremely fascinating day job as a psychologist. So how did you personally use your knowledge and experience as a psychologist to help you create your characters?
So yeah, my research area is in mental illness, specifically mental health and sort of varieties of mental health disorder and varieties of personality. So that background's been very useful in helping develop characters. We often don't see sort of mental illness portrayed in novels, and when you do, it's in a very, very one-dimensional way, as I think you're going to mention in a second. But so I try to create characters that are a bit more that are a bit more nuanced, and also that sort of don't go to extremes as often. So they're just sort of they exhibit sort of slightly milder symptoms and slightly milder presentations of conditions that we're all familiar with, and slightly more complexly as well. So it's not just like this character has this thing, this character has this thing, because in real life people have all kinds of complex overlapping things, and some of these come from the individual, some of these come from your environment, and they all kind of go into a pot to make who you are.
Absolutely. And I think, I will happily rant and rave about one-dimensional villains in particular, but we'll get to that shortly. I wanted to pick up on one specific line in your bio, which is, it turns out it's much harder to tell the difference between madness and sanity than we might think, in a world where most people still believe in superstition, magic, and the paranormal. So can you talk to listeners about your research? I know I found that line in particular very fascinating from a psychological perspective and in terms of character creation. So I'd love to delve into the fine line and some of your findings.
Wonderful, yeah. So my first interest in this whole field before I even started my PhD was looking at delusions and hallucinations. So delusions are false beliefs, like, believing that the government has launched a special task force to try and hunt you down, which for most people isn't true. And hallucinations are false perceptions. So, hearing voices or seeing people that aren't there. And yeah, those two experiences combine to form what we call psychosis, which is the medical term for what we call for the main symptom of schizophrenia or dementia or other names for madness, basically. But it turns out that a large portion of the healthy population, population that doesn't have schizophrenia or psychosis or dementia, also experience the same things. They experience very severe delusions that are hard to shake, that seem totally bizarre and implausible. And they also experience hallucinations. Lots of people hear voices, lots of people see things that aren't there. And we don't want to call those people mad. So it's about trying to, so my research was all about trying to explore that spectrum and see it as a spectrum. In particular, I looked at perception of eye direction, because it's quite a useful single aspect of human perception to look at. So obviously, when we look at someone's face, we're looking at their eyes a lot, because their eyes are a very useful social cue to figure out what they're thinking. And we, in particular, look out for when they're looking back at us, because if someone's looking at us, that's very important. That means that they are talking, are interested in us in some way, whether that's to punch us in the face or seduce us, which are all very important things for us to be aware of when they're happening. So we all tend to look at our so we all look very closely for other people that are looking straight at us, and in particular, we all tend to overestimate how often someone really is looking at us, and this is a very predictable bias. So it turns out that people with psychosis do this a lot more. They're a lot more likely to think that people are looking straight at them. But we all do it to some extent, and there's a spectrum of people, there's a spectrum of strengths of that bias. And so I was really exploring that strength of bias and seeing how it maps onto our idea of psychosis or not psychosis.
That is absolutely fascinating. Can I ask more questions? So you talked about how, okay, wait, no. So have you ever personally experienced hallucinations? Sorry, I have so many questions. Yeah, because I was really young and had an extremely bad fever for a prolonged period of time when I was a child, and I experienced hallucinations, and I never knew that they were hallucinations until I was older. And
wow.
yeah, well, I mean, my mum knew, but obviously, like, you forget that you've been ill and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, my doctor's on TV. When I was like in my young teens, my mum was like, what do you mean? And this particular illness was always very vivid in my mind because I missed out on a really big school trip. And I was like, oh, do you remember that time I was ill? And at the time we had it was back when doctors would still come and do call outs to houses. So we had a doctor come and visit, and I can't for the life of me. Oh yes, I do remember his name now. But anyway, so I thought that the person who'd come to be my doctor was Gary Rhodes, the chef with like the spiky hair, who I think recently passed away, actually, sadly. But yeah, I still remember that. And I had a few hallucinations that then gave me some irrational fears. So I got trypophilia after it, which is the fear of like lots of tiny holes. And also I was,
You'd hate the climax of my book then, God.
and then there was another one about Beauty and the Beast, and I just, like, this whole scene was playing out in front of me. But yeah, anyway, so have you ever personally experienced hallucinations?
Yeah, one thing that I've had intermittently my whole life are night terrors, which are very commonly experienced just as you're falling asleep. You can get these vivid and very terrifying hallucinations. In my case, I was once living in this basement flat, and I was all alone. I was living with a girlfriend at the time, but she was out. And then that night, I was lying in bed, again, eyes open, everything seemed normal. Saw this black smoke coming through the crack in my door, my bedroom door, and slowly filling up my room. And then the black smoke slowly turned into a human form in my room, like a monk with a big hood up with an invisible face, and started just sort of threatening me, basically, and just saying these dark and sinister things from underneath their hood. And then the monk basically raised me out of my bed, so raised me horizontally straight up out of my bed, and I was totally frozen in place. I was raised up like a horror film, and then I was raised up and then spun violently around, like sort of clockwise like this for a while, and then I was stopped and then spun head over heels like this as well, spun backwards and forwards all different directions, sort of slightly levitated out of my bed and then like thrown back into my bed. And then I came out of this, the monk sort of vanished, and I was like, oh my God, like if I weren't the most sort of arch skeptic person you'd ever met in your life, if I wasn't a total atheist, rationalist, scientist, everything you could possibly name, I would certainly have just been converted to some kind of belief in demons or sort of dark angels, because everything was so very vivid, and there was nothing about it that made, that gave it away. There was hallucination. I woke up thinking, thank God that's not going to ever happen again. And then the next night, the exact same thing happened. Exactly the same.
It's amazing also because obviously perception is such a huge part of our reality as well, and that so many beliefs can come from these things. So I wondered, you mentioned that it's really normal for people who are, sort of, to use a better word, sane, to also have hallucinations and things. So can you give examples of what somebody who is classified as sane might have as a is it just the hallucinations, or do even they also experience delusions?
No, it's absolutely, it can be delusions as well, and delusions can be often more less noticeable, but then more prominent when you do notice them. So interestingly, so in the diagnosticians and statisticians manual for psychological disorders, which is how psychiatrists diagnose these things. A delusion, for example. Let me just check this. Let me just make sure I get this right. I've got it up here. So in the fourth edition of this book, a delusion was defined as a false belief based on incorrect inference about external reality that is firmly sustained despite what almost everyone else believes and despite what constitutes incontrovertible and obvious proof or evidence to the contrary. The belief is not one ordinarily accepted by other members of the person's culture or culture. And that final sentence is the most interesting one. In fact, it even says, e.g., it is not an article of religious faith. Because in fact, a lot of religious beliefs, a lot of beliefs that large swathes of the population believe, some would argue have all the hallmarks of a sort of delusional belief because they're very, very ungrounded in reality, and they're held very, very firmly in the face of any sort of discussion or reasoning. So that's one example. And another example is superstition, which, a huge percentage of the population have strong superstitious beliefs, which again, not even sort of religious sort of leaders are saying that these things are true. Like, the belief that a black cat is literally bad luck, or a sort of belief that people can sort of send out sort of bad energy and curse other people, or send good energy and make other people better. Huge percentages of people of the population actually do sort of genuinely believe these things, and I would argue, there's absolutely no reason to, and it's very strange that they would, basically.
It makes me wonder where people who believe in conspiracy theories sit on that spectrum. So I love a conspiracy theory, but I use them as like inspiration for a lot of, I'm sort of plotting some dystopian novels which are not being written. Well, they're kind of, when you just let them percolate, but I've got 2 other series I need to write first. But yeah, I suppose It makes you wonder like where conspiracy theories also sit on that spectrum. It's
a great other example, yeah.
One of my big bugbears is when writers use mental health illnesses as the cause of evil or villainy in their villains. Could you talk a little bit about how writers can include mental health issues sensitively and in an ethically appropriate way?
Excellent. So this question makes me uneasy because I have a villain who does in fact have some visible signs of psychosis, and psychosis is a classic example of a mental health condition that is very severely stigmatized as being sort of causing criminality, when of course it doesn't in reality. So I often think, have I actually done this? Am I a person who can speak on this authoritatively, or have I just made made all the same crashing errors as any other less well-versed author would in this subject? And the answer is, well, I hope not. I have no idea really. What I would say is that first of all, I have, as I said, many characters who arguably have some kind of diagnosable mental health condition, even though none of them actually do have in the novel a formally diagnosed mental health condition. And so there is a sort of there is a balance there. It's not just that all the villains are wandering around with these bizarre conditions and all the heroes are sort of mentally stable and strong and pure. Everyone is sort of got this kind of inner life that's somewhat characterized by difficulty or pain or suffering. I would also say that I would also say that the reverse can be easily simply trying to omit these kinds of people from your novels is arguably just as bad, because you're sort of then just erasing a huge percentage of the population that do have mental health conditions, and losing in the process, the opportunity for lots of interesting characters and rich, more diverse, sort of neurodiverse characters in your novels. I think 1 in 4 people are said to have a mental health condition at some point, and it's probably higher than that. So if you're just cutting all those people out of your novel, then you're doing your book a disservice, and you're doing your readers a disservice too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so perhaps it wasn't a very well worded question, but I suppose
it's a great question. It's a very important question.
Yeah, and the thing is, I suppose what what my irritation is when the mental health illness is blamed for their criminal behavior, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think there are lots of villains out there who are just plain assholes.
Yeah.
And just like you say, heroes also can have mental health illnesses, and a quarter of the population essentially do, and I completely agree that we should have both mental illnesses covered in our novels, and also any other diverse aspects. So I suppose, is there anything else that you could dig into in terms of how writers can be sensitive in terms of including this? Let's say somebody wants to include one. What should they do?
I'd recommend, obviously you can start by looking at resources online, just if you have no idea about what mental health condition looks like, then obviously there's plenty of great summaries online about what the core features are. But if you really want to dig in and find out what it means to have that mental health illness, and you don't know anyone personally who has that, or perhaps you don't want to badger them about it for novel research, because that's be pretty insulting. There's plenty of non-fiction written by people who have these conditions. I would recommend finding something that's written, from the perspective of someone who has these conditions, because they will always give you that much richer sort of inner life and experience. There's plenty of testimonials and or collected testimonials like that. There's also lots of great fiction out there that will cover this. The most famous example, I think, was The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which we'll remember, written by a boy that has Asperger's syndrome. And it's got a very, very evocative narration style, and the main character just shines through, and it's clearly a very well written novel. Reading fiction might seem like a silly way to find out more, but this fiction is often written by people who have a lot of awareness of, have done their own research and have portrayed it on the page, and you can learn a lot about how you can portray similar things on the page as well.
Absolutely. And I loved that book as well. I read that a few years ago and thought it was an absolutely fantastic novel. Are there any particular aspects of an illness that a writer should research? What should they look for specifically?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean.
Okay, so obviously there are lots of different aspects. So I guess what I'm talking about is, for example, if somebody has, say, schizophrenia, what aspects of that would be useful to know about in terms of a good representation? Would it be symptoms? Would it be treatments? What are the different elements that a writer should know about in order to create something that's truly representative of that illness?
Right, I see. Yeah, so I run into this problem. I come at it from a scientific point of view, and so I've obviously read a lot about potential neural causes of schizophrenia and how it's caused by abnormal dopamine production in the brain, and how it's caused by incorrect neural pruning. And of course, all this information is completely irrelevant to trying to create a character with schizophrenia on the page. The scientific outlook, and again, the highly medicalized outlook, the very sort of, how do we treat it? Okay, what are the symptoms from a psychiatrist's point of view? What is the psychiatrist looking for? Those are often very misleading in terms of trying to explain what it means to have schizophrenia. So again, I would always look for first-hand accounts. First-hand, what is it like to have schizophrenia from the inside? Who's written about this? There's lots of very eloquent accounts written about this. And what's it like to be friends with someone with schizophrenia? Likewise, you can have second-hand accounts, but ones that come from a point of view of not a formal scientific point of view or a medical point of view. You want the everyday social point of view to come shining through.
Yeah, I love that, because that also plays to the emotional line in a novel, and sort of the emotional relationships that people would have with somebody who might have a condition. Okay, let's move on. In recent times, we've seen some horrific acts of violence, particularly linked to intolerance. I know that you've also done some research on these topics. So can you talk a little bit about the psychological traits behind these acts, as I think it will help listeners with their character development, probably especially for their villains?
So this is a fascinating question, and I could definitely talk for an hour just on this, but I'm going to have to try and say just one thing if I can, and that is, historically we've seen terrorists as well, and we still do in the everyday world. We see terrorists often as as lone madmen, and we kind of stop the story there. We're like, this person was insane because they did this terrible thing, and that's the end of the story. We can't possibly hope to understand them any more than that they're just insane. And of course, that doesn't tell us anything about why they would do it. And it also further stigmatizes the concept of insanity and makes other people with schizophrenia who would never dream of hurting anyone, feel terrible and look terrible. But in the sort of in the world of criminal psychology, we've moved away from understanding these things on an individual level and more to looking at them in a group level. And there's one phenomenon which is fascinating, for example, called in the field of group psychology, which is called groupthink, which is how members of a particular group will tend to get more and more extreme in their beliefs over time if they are left alone and they have little contact with external beliefs. And there's a lot of different factors going into that. One of them is the need for belonging. Like we all join groups because we want to then feel like we belong to the group. And so we then figure out what beliefs the group holds, and then we then adopt a more extreme version of that belief, so that we can feel really we want to feel like the most extreme member of that group. And then the whole group shifts further and further into more extreme beliefs. And this is exactly how cults form. Well, that's one factor in how cults form. You have a relatively mild set of maybe religious or spiritual beliefs over time, becoming more and more extreme until they develop a life of their own. And you also see that as they become more extreme, they become more cut off from the outside world. So you see the same thing in terrorist groups as in cults, in that the group will start to enforce start to insist they don't listen to the outside world anymore, because those are dangerous, infidel, unpleasant beliefs that we must cut off, and we have to only listen to our own chosen leaders and masters. And then again, that's a surefire recipe to make the unbeliefs more extreme. So where criminal psychology is now is that a perfectly mentally healthy, normal person that we wouldn't think of as being in any way mentally ill can still, thanks to traits that are in every single human, can still fall prey to these mechanisms and become a terrorist or become a cultist, or similarly end up in a sort of extreme position that we can't understand.
That is so fascinating, especially that we all harbour these traits as well. And also given me lots to think about in terms of one of my particular villains, who is, and I don't think I realised that this is what they were doing, but definitely trying to form some kind of a cult. I'm now like, this is a rabbit warren of research I need to go down. Okay, so for selfish reasons, what kind of, are there any books or resources that you would recommend in particular that you've read on this topic?
Good question. The one that springs to mind, just because I came across it recently, is there's a Netflix series called Wild Wild Country, which is all about Rajneeshpuram, which was it's a fascinating group because some people very fervently believe that it's a cult and it's an evil and dangerous cult, and then there's other people who say no, this is just this was a religious center. It was founded in Oregon, USA, and it was just a sort of religious center run by this charismatic leader called Osho, who's now dead. But the religious group still survives, and they have centers around the world. But they're still wildly, many people decry them as being a cult. And I enjoy the ambiguity there. I enjoy that it's not a very clear case of sort of a murderous or suicidal cult. That it's not at all like that. It's much more subtle. So that's a good one. Yeah.
Thank you. I am definitely putting that on my Netflix list. Okay, this is my favorite question. This is the Rebel Author podcast. So tell us about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Great question. Yeah, love it. My mind immediately went to Extinction Rebellion, back in the before times when we were allowed out, and we could go to protests and things. I was lucky to be involved in this group called Extinction Theatre that brought street guerrilla street theatre as part of the wider protest that was going on in London last year. What we were doing were creating small theatrical, sort of candid camera style, like theatrical experiences that people didn't know were theatrical. So we were sort of performing live scenes and seeing if we could sort of get people to believe us. And what we were doing was trying to create a world where global warming has accelerated and has led to severe economic issues. So we had we had food rationing being brought back, and people having to queue for food rations, and sort of people handing out food but running out of food rations, and all the sort of misery and chaos and sort of societal pressure that would cause, which at the time seemed like a very far-fetched sort of reality. But this year really has seen us enter into sort of bizarre, borderline dystopian world in many ways, which has made that reality come true.
Yes, and I suspect there'll be an explosion of dystopian novels from indie authors coming soon. Okay.
Apparently, there's never been a worse time to do a dystopian novel.
Yeah, well, yes. Yeah, well, no, because everybody wants escapism from it. However,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but there will still be loads of, give it a year or two and there'll be an absolute flood of dystopian novels. Okay, tell listeners where they can find out more about you and your books.
Great. So my author website is alexbryantauthor.com. And you can find my books on Amazon. You can find my books in all reputable bookstores, as long as your definition of reputable is just the one that's at the end of my street, which very kindly agreed to stock it as a sort of personal favor. Other than that, I really recommend sticking to Amazon. That's going to be the most useful option for most people. Yeah, you can search Alex Bryant, The Identity Thief, God Machine, and you should be able to find me there. Or go to my website where you can get your teeth into various bits of bonus content and background stories and world building.
Superb. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I will make sure that all of those links are also in the show notes. So thank you very much to all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, then you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sacha Black. Thank you very much also to all of our listeners. I'm Sacha Black. You are listening to Alex Bryant. Actually, you are listening to Dr. Alex Bryant. You deserve your props for that. And this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, as already mentioned, I will have an interview with Becca Puglisi, all about character occupations and how you can use them to create conflict and connect it to your theme. And yes, I am super excited for that episode next week. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.